All right, 3, 2, 1. Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little exhausted. I just got back from viewing the first ever competitive Warcry event at Adepticon. Um, just an incredible scene. I mean, yesterday was the narrative event. I have so many thoughts on that, way too many to put into like a really fast right after the tournament video. I will be recording about that and doing a interview with the Dogs of Warcry who put it on. They did a great job. But I want to talk about the competitive event that I just got back from. Kind of the first look at what Warcry looks like post the Tome of Champions, which just had a huge effect on the game, as I'll get into. I am going to talk about some of the other lists at the event that were there in another video, kind of the top lists that I saw over the weekend. I've got one more. We've got one more competitive event tomorrow. I'm going to be playing in it instead of covering it, so I will talk about it and all the cool lists that I see, after that one. But for now, I just want to kind of get the latest and greatest out right away. Let's start by talking about the second place list. This is Riley. She's half of Swolehammer. They're starting a new new YouTube channel. I don't know why I was blanking, but they're starting a new YouTube channel. They started kind of right around when the Tome of Champions was dropping. So go check them out. I'll link to them down below, along with, it's Riley and Rafik. And Riley's Gloomspite Gitz was a Squig Hopper boss, 3 Squig Hoppers, 3 Netters. Now, prior to the TOC, I would not have rated this list. I just would have said drop a Squig Hopper, get some more, other things in there. But I think that lists like this, there's kind of a shift in what's important, where you still need big things and tiny things, which is what this has. But the balance between big and tiny may have shifted a little bit. You'll see some of the other successful lists there. This list had 2 major wins, 2 minor wins. So, the 4-0 couldn't quite sort of get into a showdown with the other undefeated lists, so couldn't prove it, and so had fewer tournament points, and so came in second. But really incredible job. Lots of just extreme speed and mobility, along with, real damage potential. The Squig Hopper boss is obviously famous for being able to delete chaff units, which was very important here. I don't have an interview with Riley because I'm going to be trying to do a little collab with the Swolehammer people, so I can kind of talk to them about their lists. The other Swolehammer player, Rafik, was also there, also did very well. And had what I would say is a more like a really scary sort of board swarm, what I would have traditionally pre-TOC said is one of the top lists. It was actually my pick to win the event. I'll be talking about it later. But before that, I want to get into the third place list that was in the finals. And this was Darcy's Beasts of Chaos. I'm going to be talking about this more as I go into kind of in future videos going into the painting meta, because Darcy did win Best Painted, but was in the finals with a shot to also win the tournament, and that would have been incredible if she won Best Painted and Best General. Her Beast of Chaos list, a Doom Bull, a Dragon Ogre with Glaive, that's the 2-inch reach one, trading in a little bit of damage for that extra flexibility, and then a Cockatrice, flying all around the board, doing respectable damage itself, and then 5 chaff models. This is, I think, a really awesome and interesting Beast of Chaos thing. Again, we see the trend of having, I would often sort of recommend, before the TOC, I would be recommending lists that would be, 2 heavy hitters and a whole bunch of board flood. We're seeing, people succeeding with 3 threats at least in all situations here. But before I even get to that, let's just run the interview. Let's let Darcy speak for herself on this one. I'm here with Darcy, who has just won Best Painted 2 days in a row at Warcry events.
But before I get to that, I want to talk about your competitive performance, because you nearly won the whole tournament, getting both trophies, but you were right there in the finals, just barely lost out in the end. Can you talk a little bit about your run?
Yep, sure thing. Getting to that point in the finals was honestly about 90% luck. I basically got the rolls I needed when I needed them. Lots of crits in the second game when I needed them. And the final games where the luck started to kind of run out a little bit, but it was still close the whole way through. So I'm not usually terribly competitive gameplay wise, so I'm gonna say luck.
Sure. And then the list itself seemed really effective on the table. Can you talk a little bit about sort of why you made the list choices you did, kind of what you were planning there?
I more or less went with the rule of cool. The reason I love the Beast of Chaos is because they're basically just a zoo of random horrifying monsters. The faction itself has good stats in general, like across the board, but there's just a lot of different monsters with different flexibility. You've got mobility with the cockatrice, you can fly and do some damage, 30 wounds on him. Dragon Ogre's pretty similar, he's got a 2-inch range, and then you've got Doom Bull, who's basically a freight train with horns. But I love just how these models look, so I'm lucky that my rule of cool has good stats, basically. And then just filled the list with Underworld. I wanted to have some of the Underworld's guys in here because they look so good. And then the little classic gores. So that's pretty much it.
No, that's perfect. So which one of them would you say was your MVP on the day?
On the day? Well, I was going to say my Doom Bull, but then he choked when it mattered in the last game. I would say,
for people who don't know what she's referring to, the Doom Bull left Skaith on 1 health, and that was the difference in the game, right?
That was the difference. He rolled 3 ones.
Yeah.
and 5 dice, and that mattered. I'm gonna go with the cockatrice because he took a lot of beating and was able to fly around a good amount. He almost survived enough to get away in the last round, which would have mattered. I would have finished my hidden agenda then too. But I'm gonna say the cockatrice.
Cool. And so then you talked a little bit about Rule of Cool, and then obviously you Rule of Cooled your way to 2 Best Painted awards. Talk a little about how do you approach hobby with Warcry, because it's pretty different than AOS, right? In that you get to kind of focus in on one thing, right?
And I think that's why Warcry attracts so many painters, because you've got smaller model count. You've got, especially with the traditional Warcry Chaos teams, you've got much more dynamic models. So I think overall it's just a more paint-friendly game, because you don't have to paint, 50 guys, 60 guys. You can put a little more love and care into your general or your big beastie monsters. So overall, I think it's just because you've got that lower model count, you can take the time and not actually have to put in that much time.
Yeah, I thought the painting standard, especially for yesterday's narrative event, was just mind-blowing.
It was the Sylvaneth that I lost to, the Kyle's Sylvaneth.
Well, yeah,
I'm surprised I beat them painting-wise, because they were gorgeous. It was basically spring or summer versus fall Beast of Chaos. So
that's cool. I didn't think about that.
Yeah,
okay.
I was looking at the colors. I was like, this looks amazing. The contrast is converging on each other.
Yeah. Pretty wild for you guys to essentially go 1 and 2 in both the tournament and in the painting competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sylvaneth versus Beast of Chaos. It's tale as old as time.
The classic. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me, for sitting down with me. Congratulations on your performances in both hobby and competing. So,
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you for the interview. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So one of my key takeaways from that interview was, so Darcy was obviously very modest about her path to the finals, just saying that the dice did it all for her. I don't think that's true. One of the things I was actually struck with in the narrative event, I went 2-1 in the narrative event with a pretty sort of casual Sylvaneth list, but the one I lost, I was really struck by how good players seem luckier because they put themselves in a position where a good dice roll swings the game heavily in their favor, but a poor dice roll doesn't crush them. And so you notice the good dice rolls more with good players, just because that good dice roll is enough to swing the whole game in their favor. So the whole thing of like, the people who win are just the luckiest. Well, that is true, but you roll a ton of dice in Warcry. And yes, a lot of Warcry games come down to one dice roll that's like a 65-35% chance of what's going to happen. But it it does usually even out, and so I think Darcy's being just a little modest there, saying that the dice got her to the finals. But this is a list that really positions you in a place where you roll a lot of dice and the dice do a lot. I think what Darcy said about the monsters, again, Darcy being extremely modest as far as saying it's just rule of cool. These monsters are very well put together in terms of the choices here, right? The Doom Bull, Darcy was actually on sort of the Discord and the Facebook and Reddit, just kind of talking through whether or not the Doom Bull was worth its points, because it got a pretty major nerf in the TOC. But what it gives as far as just being such a beatdown monster is so powerful. The Cockatrice and the Dragon Ogre, just all with mobility and damage and durability, all three of them getting all three of those things in different amounts, but just a really incredible list, I think, and just really well played throughout the tournament. Now let's talk about Kyle. Kyle crushed this tournament with Sylvaneth. It's so crazy. So when I was doing my tier list, my algorithm called Sylvaneth one of the new sort of top A tier factions, and I didn't believe it at first. So here's Kyle kind of proving me wrong, my algorithm right, and I got to sit down with him too, which I'm really excited about. All right, I'm here with Kyle, the inaugural Warcry competitive champion for the first ever Adepticon. Tell me a little bit about your warband and how you decided to put them together.
Yeah, so I did a mix of Skaith's Wild Hunt and traditional Sylvaneth. So plan was, when we broke them into the Hammer, Shield, and Dagger, was to give myself some versatility, especially for the 6 different missions in the new Tome of Champions. So,
Yeah.
one of the things I kind of looked at early on was that there's 2 treasure missions, and going 4 rounds, you're probably going to end up playing one, so having a flyer was going to be pretty important. So I made my leader the Arch Revenant. Had some decent damage output, survivability, and then again, just kind of that movement. And then from there, I kind of filled it out, other roles between chaff, mobility, ability to take, kind of give myself some options within the objectives later in the game.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were really like looking at each mission and building for the missions.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So the majority of the missions, your shield's actually going to start on the field. So having a good mix in your shield, potentially that flyer in there, a tank, and some chaff, kind of gives you a lot of options early on, especially when you start. Generally, the hammer and dagger is starting off. The dagger is almost always in reserve. So with the exception of the last mission that we did, the kill mission. And so that kind of put me on the ropes a little bit, but having the hammer with a little extra mobility and Skaith helped, because on some of those early treasure missions, that combined allowed me to get some early objective points.
Yeah, can you talk about Skaith a little bit? Because I think that profile, a lot of people would look at just 2 attacks and wonder, like, how do I really make this effective? But it was really good for you this tournament.
Yeah, so when I was looking through, I really wanted to try to incorporate one of the new Bladeborn warbands. There's some interesting stuff in there, Mollog, a few of the others. Skaith, thought people were kind of sleeping on a little bit. A little bit interesting, so decent survivability, toughness 4, 22 wounds, but what's pretty cool about it is you have 8 movement, and while you can't necessarily go up walls because you are cavalry, you also have a spear, which does output 2-5 and strength 4. So what that allows you to do is get around the board really quickly, and if there's an individual with low health carrying a treasure, you need to get to an objective, you just have a lot of different options between the speed, the survivability, and the option to cherry pick with that 2-5 spear to just kind of drop the last amount of damage you need to take care of somebody. So definitely helped in the last mission, certainly to get out quick on a rampage, drop a couple spears, and then move away out of the range of danger.
Yeah.
And then I think you deployed with a Tree Revenant in every deployment group. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so I chose to put a Tree Revenant in every deployment group. One of the cool things about Sylvaneth is their ability to teleport. So again, knowing that there was going to be treasure missions and objective missions, that allowed me pretty early on to get where I needed to be to either match somebody's number on an objective or grab a treasure and then teleport out of the range of danger. Unlike some of the previous missions and a lot that kind of come in the box, you don't necessarily have to worry about not being within 3 inches of the edge of the board, so you can really utilize with this Tome of Champions kind of the full range of the board, and that mobility helps out a lot with that. So
That's really good to remember. That's something I hadn't thought about. That's cool.
you don't have to worry about the shrinking effect on the board really with some missions.
Yeah. And last, what would you say was your MVP for the tournament?
So MVP was definitely Scathe. So,
Really?
Yeah, Scathe.
Okay.
Every round either carried a treasure, was the last person I needed to claim an objective, or was able to get out real quick and pick off somebody on this last kill mission. So definitely a great utility character. Pretty happy overall.
Cool. Well, thanks for spending some time sitting down with me. Any last shout outs you want to?
No, had a great time here. Everybody I played against, Joel, I think Jason, as well as Darcy this last match, all really challenging games. Nobody was really a windfall or anything like that. So
Sure.
fantastic event. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
So Kyle obviously put a ton of thought into what the Tome of Champions means for list building for Warcry going forward. Just a diversity of threats, really wanting 3 threats is, I think, very, very helpful. The thing that really struck me watching Kyle pilot Scathe, who was, in his point of view, his MVP, I was one of the people kind of poo-pooing Scathe, kind of being skeptical about its abilities. My algorithm was high on Scathe, and I just assumed, because my algorithm is always a little higher on fast archers than I am, and I've always thought that it's just kind of a bug in the system. But I was struck with, and in theory they should be good, I get so skeptical about the kind of total damage output that's there. But he proved that it's not necessarily about whether you have the damage output in a unit, as long as your warband has damage output. It's important to be able to put the damage where you need to. I watched he was doing like very creative uses of the 8-inch move and the sort of the throwing of the spear. I think a novice would struggle to use this list as effectively as Kyle did. There's a lot of fragile pieces in this list. The Arch Revenant is also just like a flying, great damage dealer, but 25 hit points for a 245 point model is not very many, right? So for the Arch Revenant to be worth its points, you have to be very careful and very smart with it. I think the same is true with Scathe, where you need to be making sure that all of the damage it does is finishing off fighters, right? That is Scathe's job, is making sure that you're always where you need to be, killing a thing and counting for an objective at the same time. I was just blown away by Kyle's play in terms of, like he said, right, Scathe was always carrying a treasure, catching up to an objective that was unclaimed, something like that, while also killing people. Taking out chaff models, mostly chaff models that had been left on 1-2 points. I was really impressed by that. I know, like for example, the Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe often leaves 10-point models on 2 points left, or sometimes will deal 6 damage to 8 wound models. So Scathe being able to kind of have a very good chance of doing 2 damage to clean that up is really powerful. And just, the way he was able to always make Scathe be doing 2 things at once was, 1, really impressive, and 2, I think really the key to using this list well. I think if you try to pick up this list and you're not thinking about that, I think you might have a tough time. However, here obviously it wasn't a problem for him. He went 4-0. All 4 were major victories. It was pretty incredible. I also think this really drives home how much Underworlds changes the game for Sylvaneth. One thing, I need to go over some of my worst takes sometime, and certainly being as horribly wrong on Scathe as I was is one of them. But one of the things I was very right about was before the Underworlds even came out, I talked about Sylvaneth being just 1 inch away from being a top tier force in Warcry. They just needed the tiny little buff, and that if anyone was going to have Underworlds change the game for them, it was going to be Sylvaneth. And I think Kyle really proved that here. I think, certainly my Skynet, my computer thought so in my last tier list video, but I think Kyle absolutely proved it. I think the way he used his Underworld models, not just Scathe, but also the 3 chaff units that you get, with the little cat being really fast, right? So Kyle was able to have speed and threats in every single deployment zone because of how he was able to kind of balance these Underworlds fighters. The fact that he had multiple sources of an AoE triple if he needed it was really powerful, because with 9 fighters, that's not enough to guarantee a big team fight in one spot, but it's often enough that you'll have 3 people, 4 people fighting in a place, and the fact that he was able to have that option was really strong. So a lot of really interesting lessons to come out of this list. Really happy to see it, and I can't wait to see what people bring tomorrow. So those are the top 3 lists from the event. I think one also really interesting lesson. So at the end of the event, in the final round, the top 3 tables were apparently very far in terms of tournament points ahead of the people on the 4th table. None of them had losses except to each other of the top 6, so I think they really proved kind of a real power level there, and I think it was extremely instructive that while they didn't all have 3 threats like these top 3 did, they all had a 10-inch flyer. There was a Stormcast list with a Knight of Zeros as its flyer, and then a lot of Gryph-hounds. And then there was a Soulblight Gravelords list and then it was 2 Soulblight Gravelords lists with Vargoyles, and then just using tons of chaff spam. So very interesting trend, and also, really interesting to see Soulblight Gravelords so effective in this tournament. They had Soulblight Gravelords never lost except to the 3 lists that I just showed in this video. So I think they proved, and that was throughout the tournament. So I think that they proved to be pretty intense. I know that had been a question of mine going in, when I was sort of looking at the meta, navigating tier lists, was how much respect to give to the kind of shambling hordes, the millions of skeletons, zombies. I think the tournament proved that they can be beaten, but they are an absolute force, and I can't wait. I will absolutely sort of show a breakdown of some of the other powerful and successful lists to come out of this weekend in a future video, and I will definitely talk about the 2 Soulblight Gravelords lists that did pretty well at this tournament. So I'm going to, by the time you're watching this, I'm probably currently playing a game in the next tournament that they're having tomorrow. So I'll be doing some more stuff about this, about all of Adepticon. Such an incredible experience. So yeah, that'll be coming out in the next weeks to come. And until then, may all your rolls be crits.